I do have a problem with prohibition. And if we look at that, and I hope I haven't oversimplified it, but ultimately, just 120 years. Let's look at the full 5,000. So the work we're doing now, that you're doing, that I'm doing, it's about reimagining cannabis as a plant that we can apply as a medicine. And that shame we will chip away at. It's going to take time.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Harmonia Podcast. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Harmonia Podcast. Today, we are joined by the fantastic, I was going to say fabulous, fantastic. It's really hard to pick a word to describe Melanie, but today we are joined by the awesome Melanie Wentzel. Hi, Melanie.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on here. Melanie is, do you know, she does a lot of fantastic stuff, and I can sit here and brag about her all day. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to let her brag about herself. So, hi, Melanie. Would you like to give more of a formal introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Melanie Wentzel, and I'm an Australian cannabis professional and author. I have been in the cannabis industry as a professional for a year and a half, but I've had a relationship with cannabis for a very long time. And I've been a cannabis patient also for longer than I've been a professional in the industry. So cannabis and I are very familiar. And it's a real pleasure now to bring my professional skill set into this part of the industry. So my professional skill set, actually, I'm trained in psychology. So I'm really interested in and passionate about people and their behaviour. But where I've applied that work for the past decade is in public health care, in public health systems. So I trained as a project manager as well, and I've spent, the better part of a decade implementing innovative and emerging models of care, largely in Australia, but also a little bit in the States and a little bit in the UK. So I'm really interested and excited by fabulous healthcare that is person-centered, culturally responsive, accounts for gender, considers the person and their community. And so now I bring all of that passion and excitement and that experience to cannabis.
And honestly, that is just amazing. For the record, this is the reason why I found it very hard to give you an introduction. So, what word do I use? But no, yeah.
No, well, I also wanted to share that I've now, I've been working as a consultant for that year and a half that I've been in cannabis. So the breadth of what I've done has been really incredible, and I've worked with 28 different companies in a year and a half. So it's been a great opportunity to learn, and I've kind of gone from seed to patient. But just recently, I have moved into a new role, and I'm happy to share that I'm now working with Canam Group, who are a global cannabis company. Head office is based in Australia. Really fantastic company. I've done lots of consulting with them, but what they've recognized is that there is a disconnect between public health and the perception of cannabis in public health and the cannabis industry. So I'm really pleased to have started with them as their healthcare strategy and programs lead, which means essentially I get to bridge that gap, which is what I'm super passionate about. So I've done all the things, and now I'm coming in and I'm focusing on those relationships between the cannabis industry and mainstream healthcare, which for me is great because I speak both languages.
No, exactly, and I think I don't think I've mentioned this to you, but I have said it several times on this podcast. Is more healthcare professionals are needed. I think often I'm not quite too. I'm a little bit familiar with the UK, with the Australia sort of industry, but here in the UK, it started off more as business and marketing, and so you have a lot of people that have got a business background, but not necessarily a healthcare background, and I think that's probably where the disconnect so sort of, I'm not going to say it's the reason for it, but definitely contributed to it. And then obviously there's the public image, which is something that we here at Harmonia Podcast always want to address, because the public image is very, very negative towards medical cannabis and medical cannabis patients. I think often they feel that we are just here as we are just trying to legitimize our recreational use. And that's, as a patient, that's very painful, because I think a lot of the times I'm like, people don't realize what we're actually going through and what this medication actually does for us. And that actually brings us to your book, which highlights this. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back to you.
Beautiful. And, let me say, I couldn't agree more. And I do think, the word stigma, we've all heard and we've all said stigma 7,000 times. And at some point you think, is that word losing its meaning? But actually, no, because if now when we talk about stigma, we need to think about it more deeply. What is the root of that stigma? And it's shame. And it's shame that is placed on another, and then often internalized because of other people's attitudes. So that shame is associated with the idea that cannabis is a drug. Cannabis is actually a plant that can be used as a medicine or misused as a drug. And personally, I mean, my own politics on cannabis, I'm very open about. I do believe in an adult use market. I do believe there's a place for it. I think it's a really fantastic strategy for risk mitigation, for harm minimization. I think those are important things. But I also think that we're adults, and as long as we're educated and making informed choices, I think it's fine that people have access to this plant. In fact, I'm quite passionate about getting us to that point where we do. For me, my focus is on medical, using that plant, so plant here, drug here, medicine here, using that plant as medicine and applying that medically. And how we do that is by creating, prescribing protocol, by engaging health professionals, by creating, dosage guides, by creating resources, by educating, by structuring, and very much by listening to patients. Bodenheimer in 2014, one of the building blocks that he put right there in the foundation was the patient team partnership. Cannabis is the ultimate opportunity for high performing primary care because it is such a personalized medicine, because patients often lead the story with cannabis. So there's so much that we can do with cannabis as a medicine. The adult use piece, absolutely for it, but it's not where we are in Australia. It's not where we are in the UK. And so for me, my focus is very much on that medical piece and articulating how cannabis is used to optimize therapeutic outcomes. And that's it. That's all. That's what we do with all medicines. It's no different with cannabis, except that it is so personalized and so individual, and it requires the patient to engage well. So that's my medical rant. But yes,
Yeah, no, perfect, perfect. Please continue. Perfect. Like, I mean, I'm just sitting here smiling because you're just saying everything that I'm always screaming and shouting about. Treatment models. Treatment models are essential. Medication. This is, at the end of the day, medication. I understand that we are so accustomed to cannabis being associated with substance misuse that we are overlooking the medical side of things. The medication, not just the medication alone that we need to focus on. We need to focus on the treatment model, having some guidelines. If this is a medication that we later on want to implement into the wider healthcare sector within the UK, then having an approach that mirrors the existing approach would make it so much easier and so much more comfortable for doctors who, let's say, especially when it comes to GPs who haven't got as much experience when it comes to medical cannabis. They're going to feel really, really nervous about prescribing an unlicensed medication. So, and it's controlled as well because of the psychoactive properties. Like, so there's a lot of reasons that makes people already hesitant to prescribe this medication. So there's so many things as an industry that we really need to work on before we can really push medical cannabis as, I suppose, a viable treatment option. I mean, I'm going to keep screaming about it being a viable treatment option, but I do also recognize that we have some work to do within ourselves so that we can start pushing that further out. And you said something else that was so, so important: shame. That is, I think, one of the key areas right here. We will get to the book. I know I'm going to start ranting now, but shame. I don't know, because it resonated with me straight away. It resonated with me straight away because even I feel ashamed. And even though I know the benefits that this medication has had on me, I could not get out of bed. And I know how much it's changed and transformed my life. I still feel ashamed. Why do I feel ashamed? I wasn't feeling ashamed when I was taking copious amounts of opiates. And I mean, I was overdosing on, sorry, I was misusing my medication. I was overdosing, but I never felt ashamed of that because I was in agonizing pain and I was like, I don't care if I'm going to need 12 pills today. Guess what? I'm taking 12 pills today. And never felt shame. But medical cannabis that actually helps. And I've even reduced down, I've improved so much in my health. But some bizarre reason, I feel ashamed. Like, it makes me very upset when I think about it because I'm just like, hang on a second. Like, and I said this before, like medical cannabis is the only medication that requires advocacy. I do not see a group for why. Sorry.
Oh, well, I have an opinion about that. Well, and you won't be surprised to hear I have an opinion about that. Um, I recently, I recently spoke. I had the opportunity recently to speak to a room of 150 women, incredible women, change makers from all around the world, like really exceptional. And I had to go, I had 7 minutes to talk to them about medical cannabis. Now, I had to assume that they were largely cannabis naive, and they were from all around the world. I'm talking women from Zimbabwe, women from Germany, women from Australia. I mean, all over the world. And I literally had to assume they were all fairly cannabis naive. I could also assume they were probably carrying some bias. But I thought, how do I take these women on a journey? How do I tell this room in 7 minutes why cannabis is medicine and why it's good? And I'd like to share the sentiment, actually, that the approach that I took, because I think it was, well, I know it was effective because of the conversations that came after. Because when you've just delivered something and then someone comes up to you and they tell you the impact that it had on them or that it will have on their relationship with their husband because now they understand he's medicating. I mean, that stuff is like heartstrings, right? So literally just I went in and said, I started them and I thought, let me just bring them to the flower. And so I said, come with me 5,000 years ago into a garden in ancient China. And I talked through as though we were herbalists and we were harvesting cannabis flowers. And then we went inside and we made them into teas and et cetera, et cetera. And so they understood. It kind of dropped the shame because we were quite simply healers in a garden harvesting flowers to treat patients. And that's where we started. And then, I went on just to talk about that was 5,000 years ago. Now, the prohibition era has only been 120 years. So, with the exception of like Pope Innocent VIII in the 1400s, who leveraged cannabis to justify the witch trials, a whole other podcast. With the exception of him and a few others, really, cannabis has been accepted as a medicine and celebrated as a medicine. I mean, the ancient Greeks used it to put on their horses' battle wounds. They made a wine out of cannabis seeds. We know that the ancient Egyptians in Papyrus Ebers in the 1500 BC it was recorded. We know the history. We know that there was really no shame attached to it. When it changed in the US and it changed in the 20s. And it changed because there was a guy who owned tabloid newspapers and he wanted to sell stories. One guy. And then all of his journalists. And then we moved on. And then, of course, it kind of entered, the drug control piece came in, and then the politicians got onto it, right? And then we had kind of four, I'm not even going to name and shame today, but we kind of had the four big ones, and we had all the This Is Your Brain on Drugs, Just Say No. We had all the campaigns right through to the Clintons. And again, a whole other podcast, but, fun fact, the White House was signing off on storylines for major network TV shows to include anti-drug campaigns. I mean, this is like as recently as the Clintons. So that is, and every single kind of set of those politicians and that journalist, and Aslinger, who was, in that kind of government role, all white men, all American. I've got no problem with men, white men, and American men, but I do have a problem with prohibition. And if we look at that, and I hope I haven't oversimplified it, but ultimately, just 120 years. Let's look at the full 5,000. So the work we're doing now, that you're doing, that I'm doing, it's about reimagining cannabis as a plant that we can apply as a medicine. And that shame we will chip away at. It's going to take time.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is going to take time, especially where cannabis has become so demonized. And yes, changing the narrative is really just the only way to go, is for people to start understanding what this medication does. One of the reasons why I do like to get people on here to talk about their patient experience is so that we can get more awareness out there for the impact that it has on people's day-to-day lives. Because I think that's the crucial area that is missing. I know for myself, um, I think I've always been fortunate enough that because I have complex health needs, when I tell people I'm on medical cannabis, everybody immediately understands. They're like, yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I get it. Like, yeah. But unfortunately, not everybody is in my shoes. There's so many people out there who are having an equal amount of benefit, but unfortunately are overlooked because their health needs might not like freak people out when they hear about it, and so therefore they question the validity of that prescription. And again, sorry, I'm going to go back now to your book because I think we kind of like digressed a little bit. But I know that's me, ADHD. You shouldn't follow me. I'll just go off on one. But but no, but again, I think it kind of still brings us back around anyways, because that is what your book is about. It's about showcasing patients' experiences so that people can get a real understanding of the impact that medical cannabis is actually having on people's lives. And I'll hand back to you.
That's perfect. Yeah, look, I'm really excited because the book, which is called Cannabis Queens, which I am currently writing, and my publisher is Women Changing the World Press, which is obviously wonderful. It's going to be released in December at MJ BizCon. Very exciting. And I must actually give a shout out to the US Cannabis Women's Chamber of Commerce, and Addison Morris, who is very kindly throwing the book launch for me, because we'll have lots of the queens who were interviewed there in the room. So I'm on my writing deadline, but it's very exciting and it's coming together beautifully. So when I pitched the book, when I went to, I already had a relationship with this publisher because I've got a visual for you, because I'm a co-author in this book, Women Making a Difference. And this is a book written by 18 co-authors, women from all around the world, just talking about the work that we do. So I had already written that for them. They knew me and they had a bit of a taste of me. They'd met me a few times. So when I went to them, I said, listen, I've got a story that needs to be told. I said, in fact, I've got 1 million stories that need to be told. Will you take a meeting about a book called Cannabis Queens, which talks about women in cannabis? They loved it. They were like, yes, let's do it. I was like, okay, great. So when I went to the meeting, I prepared a deck, and the first deck I had was prohibition posters, right? With all of the girls in their torn negligees, arched backs, like the whole deal, right? We've all seen it 100 times. And then I said, so this was 100 years ago. And then I said, and this is what comes up when I Google cannabis woman, cannabis girl, women, cannabis 420 today. And it was all 420 girls in their knickers ripping bongs, right? And so for me, I said, and they kind of had a giggle, and I said, look, it is kind of funny, because how embarrassing that in 120 years, in 100 years even, we haven't moved anywhere in terms of how people perceive women and cannabis. And we all know that history and current society loves to punish women, okay? We love to demonize women. We love for things to be women's fault. It's just how it is. And if a woman steps outside the role that she should be playing, then we go straight into a game of Madonna and the whore. Which one is she? Is she a golden nurturer, who is perfect and doesn't step outside the line? And if she's not that, anything else she's a whore. She's a demon. And that Madonna and the whore complex is really important to understand because it helps us frame how we or how society uh, uh, create a narrative around women. So women in cannabis in 100 years, we're still in our knickers, right? Well, the first thing I said to the publisher was, I certainly don't work in my knickers, right? And I also don't smoke bongs. But I'm a cannabis consumer. I'm a prescribed cannabis patient. I'm a cannabis professional. I know cannabis. I love cannabis. I've dedicated my career now to this industry, and I do not look like that. And I love her. I love the 420 girl in her knickers ripping bongs. Get it, sis. Like, honestly, like, I love it. But she's one type of woman who consumes cannabis. One type. And there are billions of us. So it came about representation. So I said to them, what I want to do is actually change the narrative around women and cannabis, and it will shift the needle for cannabis in general, right? Because if women more kindly perceive women, if the world more kindly perceives women and cannabis, it'll more kindly perceive cannabis. So it's about removing the shame, moving the stigma needle, and how I can do that is by telling women's stories, right? That's my gig. Women, cannabis, storytelling. So that's how the book started. And I said, I knew the name straight away. I went to them with the name. I said, it's called Cannabis Queens. There was no, I was dead set on that. But when I started, Berta, what I thought the book was, I thought it was a timepiece. I thought I was going to capture history. This is who the women who work in cannabis are today. And it is that. And it will be something that, like, imagine if someone wrote this book in the 60s or like in the 20s. Imagine it, and we could read it. So it will be that. But actually, it's become much deeper and it's become much richer. So 2 things I learned at the start of the process. The first one is, now I'm a very spiritual person. I'm not a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person. So I'll say, the thing I learned very quickly was let go and let God. God is the universe, plant, mother nature, whatever that is, whatever is palatable for you to consume me saying that. But let go and let God. Mel, you're not in charge of this narrative. You got the book deal. Now just let us take the wheel. I was like, okay, great. And then I thought, how do I do that? And it was by becoming a vessel for stories. And quite literally, I'm picturing it like this vessel. And I was thinking, I just need to get all of these women to pour their stories in. And then the book is going to, the narrative, the story is going to emerge. The book won't write itself, but the stories that should be told, that need to be told, will already be in there. So my job is just to curate them, really, which great takes a bit of pressure off, right? So I was very, very, very fortunate. I've had, I did a survey. So I did 2 parts. I first released a survey. Now the survey was global and I got responses from every continent except Antarctica, which was perfect. Thank you very much. Most of them are from North America and Australia because my network is richest there. And I think that's, that's standard and okay. I think that's representative of the cannabis industry worldwide. So that's okay. And the survey had 25 questions, some qualitative, some quantitative data. So I looked at things like the structure of women's work. Are we full-time? Are we voluntary? Why we came to cannabis, what our current job title is, how many hours a week we work. So all of that kind of stuff, so we could get a picture of how we contribute to the industry. But then I sort of got into the relationships in cannabis. And one of the key questions I asked was, how do women treat women in the cannabis industry? Right? See that? How do women treat women? Because there's 2 pieces there. One is we definitely don't all get it right because we're humans. Okay, none of us are perfect. None of us have a gold standard record at all. Some women are terrible to other women. I can tell you now, consistently. Some women are consistently beautiful to other women. But I had to dig into that. And what I'm going to talk about in the book is I don't want to place the burden of perfectionism on women because society already does it. So I don't need us to score 100 on how women are to women in the industry all the time, but I need us to do well, and I need us to now start critically thinking as we're working, am I doing right by my sister? Am I doing good business? So we did that. So the score came up. We're getting it right about 70% of the time. We can definitely do better. It wasn't bad. Some of the scores were very low. There are some women who have been very hurt by other women in this industry. Some of the scores were very high, and I'll unpack those. And then, of course, I talked about the relationships between men and women in the industry. And I asked, I did ask the hard questions. Have you experienced gender-based discrimination, sexism in the industry? Yeah, 70% of women have. In fact, about 73% of women have. And then I offered women an opportunity to tell us what that looked like if they felt comfortable. I have hundreds of examples. Everything from being spoken over being passed over for funding, being groped. There are some stories that queens have been so generous to share with me anonymously that will be included in the book around sexual assault currently occurring in the industry, which is awful. But to have somewhere safe to put that story is a privilege that I'm able to have and to give these women, which is great. And then I talked about, actual abuse in the industry and other bits and pieces. And then I looked at diversity. So I looked at among the women who answered, and it was over 200 responses, who is queer, who is a Black or Indigenous person of colour, who is differently abled, who came from a low SES background, who is new to this place, which is what I've called people with a refugee status, people who are first generation immigrants, or, because it's kind of like it's the suitcase emoji. Who just got here? And that's okay. And it includes undocumented workers as well. So we get a picture through the survey of what the industry is like. To articulate that and to really dig in, then the interviews began, and you will know because you were one of my interview queens, which I'm so grateful for. I'm so excited to share some of your story and your incredible journey with cannabis. But I've interviewed 75 women. 75 women. Hundreds. It's just wild. So the process, and I'm delighted to share the process with you because it's so important to me that women in our industry feel seen, that everyone's had a chance to be included, because I want it to represent us. So that's Cannabis Queen. It's going to be exciting. We're going to look at themes like fear, joy, intimacy, shame, spirituality, hope. And the intimacy piece is really interesting. It's about sexual intimacy, but it's also about professional intimacy and familial intimacy and collegiate intimacy, which there were stories that emerged there that I wasn't expecting. So lots to read about, and I'm super excited for everyone to get a copy in their hands.
Yeah, first of all, it sounds absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait to read the full version of the book. Sorry. So I wrote a few notes down here because I'm just like, where do I start? No, it's every bit of information was absolutely perfect and was absolutely necessary. So please, this was your space to do that. And also, I just wanted to to the women who have had really bad experiences and essay experiences within the industry, thank you so much for speaking up and sharing your story. I know that it was probably very, very hard to do. And I just want to I really just want to give you that recognition for being brave enough to speak up about this, and Melanie as well for flagging the concerns as well, because I feel a lot in the industry we try to focus more on the good stuff, and this is good and this is good, and pretending like the other stuff isn't actually happening around us, which is very, very dangerous territory. And again, one of the things I try to showcase is the good and the bad, because the bad needs to be rectified. So we, it's something we will always support. I guess is the best way of putting the word, without me going on a tangent. So that's the first part. But also I wanted to mention how You mentioned something around. Oh God, yeah, sorry. I'm just trying to figure out where to start because you mentioned so many different things, yeah. And I really want to talk about the prohibition and how you started the book and how it sort of like evolved from something, it evolved from what you originally intended and what you really wanted to go towards. But if we just quickly come back to the prohibition, in terms of that, and in terms of all of the women that you have interviewed, I suppose what factor did that play into women within the cannabis space and feeling comfortable about speaking up, especially because you do mention within a society we do have a specific role or character that we are supposed to play, and if we deviate away from that character, then you're just like this the whore. And so did you find that that made it really, really difficult to find women? Because 75 women, I wasn't expecting that many. So it sounds like more and more women are willing to speak up about things. But I do wonder, because you did say a few women did share anonymously. So I do wonder, what sort of relationship did prohibition evolve within your book? Did that make sense? Sorry. Did that make sense?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. So it's really interesting. There's kind of three levels of it. It's this internalized, it's the internalized relationship or interaction women have with that. So how do I feel about being a woman in the cannabis industry or being a cannabis consumer? How do I feel, and what is my level of comfort with expressing that? So there's the intimate relationship with ourselves around that, and that shame. And you spoke beautifully about it before, even as even as someone who is more than justified, and not that anyone needs to be justified, but more than justified in being a cannabis patient. And I too, as I've shared it, am a cannabis patient. We still have a relationship with ourselves where we need to be at peace with the fact that we consume cannabis. We just do. So there's that level. And a lot of the women spoke about, a lot of the women were very comfortable with that relationship with themselves. But some of these women that I've interviewed are in their 70s. They've been doing this for 30 years. They've been on the front lines at Washington. Some of them have just committed their lives. The biggest bulk of women who I met with have been in the industry between 5 and 7 years, and that tracks because the Australian industry is 8 years old, and the industry, obviously more states have come online in the US, so that makes sense, and the UK. So then it's about that level of comfort talking to my family or to my partner or to my children. And I spoke a lot with women about what it is to have a relationship with cannabis when you're a mother. And it was so interesting, and I'll share, I had my privilege checked by someone in a way that I was delighted by, to be honest, because I'm not afraid to say, like, I'm on a learning journey like we all are, right? I don't profess to be an expert. I'm just a good storyteller, and I'm good at relationships, and I'm good with women in cannabis. But I don't know everything. And one of my best learnings was I went in, and I'm very proud of the fact I've got a 17-year-old son. He's our house. I'm very open about cannabis in our house. I'm very open about cannabis with him. He's on his own discovery journey that people in their late teens go on. I'm very proud of how I managed that with him. And I shared that story with one of the women I interviewed. Now, this woman, she's an exceptional woman. She is a second generation Humboldt farmer. So she is someone who has lived cannabis. And she said to me, "That's a great story." She goes, "But I've been held at gunpoint in front of my children because of cannabis." And I was like, okay. So she goes, she literally said to me, "Check your privilege about that." And I was like, I am so grateful. And then I spoke with another woman in the US, a beautiful, just the most stunning woman. You'll hear these stories in the book, but I won't name them now until it's all written. But this most beautiful woman who's active in the US cannabis industry. She's an African-American woman. She's a patient herself. She's had really chronic and complex conditions that required the support of cannabis. And I said to her, and I talked to her about her journey with telling her children, and she said to me, she gave me some realities about not only the reality of how to talk to your children at different ages and what they're going to see and how they'll interpret. But there's an extra layer of, in her words, my children are Black. So there is another level. If they go out and talk about cannabis in society, there's another level of danger. That same conversation was had with another beautiful woman in industry, African-American woman, who talked to me about that. And we spoke about it. And we spoke about the safety aspect. If her daughters go out and speak about what mum does, there's a risk there. So it was so interesting for me, and it was one of my best learnings, because I was like, oh, I'm the cool mum. And I say it all the time. I go, oh, my whole life I just wanted to be the cool mum. And I did, and I do, and I am, right? But, and I know that my son will back me up on that. But also, there's been things in my life that have not been easy, but I don't have this whole extra framework of being Black, of being from a state where it's completely illegal, of being a disabled woman. There's lots of different other frameworks that I don't have to navigate, and my son doesn't have to navigate in the mother-son conversation about cannabis. So it was such an interesting learning. That was kind of in terms of the shame and the stigma and how prohibition has impacted. I think that was for me the greatest learning in the development of the book and in the consuming of the stories. And I'm so grateful to have had my privilege checked, because, we need it sometimes.
Yeah, no, you know what? Yeah, that was fantastic. And I think that is definitely a brilliant note for us to end it on. But I just want to have one very little comment. One comment to add, which is I completely understand what you mean. Like, we are all very passionate and we all want to put a lot of education, a lot of our experience forward so that we can help drive the medical cannabis industry. But like you, I am no expert, and I'm learning as I go along on this podcast, having so many different people come on every single day. I feel like I'm learning more and more and more. And it's just absolutely fantastic. And even today, I'm learning more and more as well. So it's just absolutely fantastic. And I hope that the viewers get as much learning as I have been getting from these podcasts. But yes, on that note, Melanie, thank you so much for joining us here today and having this really captivating conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, but I adore you. And it was, you were so beautiful, and a shout out to you and to all of the Empower Her Cannabis Society and all the women, Dr. Kelly Seaman and Heidi Whitman, everyone who on my recent trip to the UK just brought me into your arms and held me tight and, showed me the way and really made space for me. And I was so grateful. And it's such a testament to what the women in this industry can do. So it was a pleasure to speak to you. And it's always a pleasure to share my story. And I'm so open to connecting. So, look, anytime, I'll talk your head off.
No worries at all. Thank you so much. And for anybody who is interested in any of the work that Melanie is doing, all of her links will be in the description section. Oh, I got tongue-tied over there. All of her links will be in the description section. Yeah, we've been on here for about half an hour. I've been having to use my brain for too long now. Symptoms are starting to present. Yeah, once I'm here for more than half an hour, you start to see the symptoms. But yes, as I was trying to say, all of Melanie's links will be in the description section. She's got a lot of amazing work coming forward. She's got a lot of amazing things that she's going to be introducing to the UK as well. So definitely keep updated. And we look forward to seeing everybody back next week. Melanie, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.